app. It's a one-time lifetime fee of $85.
I like
So it
that.
is a paid product. Yes, I knew you would. But I was playing with it last night and so like if you're just clicking around on the screen, it will like zoom in on your cursor and then like kind of follow your cursor around. And you can change those animations. But the fact that it's like, oh man, you don't have to like keyframe all that mess in Premiere or After Effects is lovely.
Yeah.
It would be really nice if you could tell it to zoom in for you, like with a shortcut on your computer.
It does that.
Like
Oh,
if you
I
know,
see.
oh, okay.
Like trigger it.
Yes, because if it's
Yeah.
just zooming in, I wonder how intelligent its zoom is. You know, if it's zooming automatically.
The other thing is it'll like you can also just like set up keyframes like, oh, go over here, and you're just like dragging a little circle on your screen to say this is where I want to zoom in, which makes it really nice.
That's cool.
But I was like, the one thing that I really want to use it for is like shorts, because I can say, oh, crop my video for a tall vertical device, and it will animate and follow based on that, or square or landscape or whatever. So Christian, what's up?
For short content is still like a pain.
I know, and
I did
like easy.
Yeah, that is super cool. I did I created some shortcuts with, or a shortcut with Keyboard Maestro. I just talked about this in a recent video.
Oh yeah.
For recording for TikTok, where it takes my browser and my VS Code window and puts them in basically vertical format sizes, and then I have shortcuts inside of ScreenFlow editing wise that I can like it records the entire screen, and then I have two different shortcuts that will clip out the individual window, so I just know exactly what those sizes are, and I can get each one individually.
I have jumped on the Raycast bandwagon.
Yeah. Are you doing fun thing? Tell me what you're doing with it.
I have a 35 tweet thread scheduled for this afternoon that's going to explain everything.
So you won't
I'm going to be very disappointed if this tweet does not do well. No, I can talk about it. So with my new computer, I debated. So my old computer was only like a year or two old. It was a Zeal computer. And then with this new job, hey, or like suggesting announcement to come. I got a new M2. And so I have never been one to like just transfer everything over. I thought about it because it was like, hey, this would be really fast. And it wasn't that long ago that I set up this other computer. But I always like to just use it as like a clean slate and like reevaluate all the apps that I use. And I've used Alfred for years. And I was like, okay, I'm going to give Raycast a solid go. And it's pretty amazing just because I have tons of extensions running, and it replaces so many other apps that I had. Like for window management, where you're talking about, I was using like a combination of Moom, Breeze, Better Touch Tool, and now all that stuff's in Raycast, which I'm like, I love that it's just all in one app, because I can never remember which one did I set all this stuff up in. It's lovely.
Well, I posted about 5 utility apps that I use all the time, and most people commented, you can do all those things in Raycast, yeah. And I think one of them, like short text snippets, I think Raycast is like just slightly slower than Keyboard Maestro. Like just slightly. So I've left those with Keyboard Maestro, but I thought about migrating more stuff.
Snippets, clipboard history.
That's another thing that I'm like picky about, because FlyCut to me has the perfect UX, and I need to go back and try Raycast, but FlyCut has the exact UX that I'm looking for with clipboard history. But I should try it in Raycast.
Yeah, so good.
Melissa, what's up? Thanks for the context for everybody else. I'm still waiting on more of Melissa's. Kevin and Amy, you would both appreciate this. Has art background, and then sometimes does like art recaps of stuff. Like if somebody gives a talk at a conference, she'll do like a drawing,
a sketch note?
diagram. Yeah, it's like they're so good, and I wholeheartedly, and other people should push her to do this too. Like she could build a whole brand around this stuff and do that. Like build up a newsletter with these really beautiful cheat sheets for stuff. Like you have such a good niche there. Anyway, that's Melissa who's joining us in the chat.
There's do you guys follow, I think it's Steve Bartlett?
I don't know.
Talking about? Hold on.
Poor Alfred, then laid off by Amy. I know, and Amy was huge on Alfred for a long time.
I know. Well, and what's terrible is I was paying for the upgrades, and then finally the last time I upgrade, I was like, I'll do the power upgrade, so I never have to pay for this ever again. I've used it for like 10 years.
And now you don't use it at all.
No, I don't use it. Okay, his name is Stephen Bartlett, and he has the Diary of a CEO podcast. In full disclosure, this will make it look like James messaged this out. But I've heard fantastic things about this podcast. I've never actually listened to it. But he also has some good content on LinkedIn. And he has these really beautiful, maybe not beautiful, but these great illustrations to go along with some of the points that he makes. I thought it was him. I'm not seeing it right now.
Now you're just making stuff up.
I am just making stuff. I thought it was him. Maybe I've mixed him up with somebody else. No, he does. So if you like go back in the feed, I had to go back a while, but he has these illustrations to go along with some of these points that he makes. And it's like these illustrations very succinctly describe exactly what you're talking about and provide a great visual. But yeah, that is a great brand strategy.
Yep. A couple of comments in the chat. Hope of Glory and Shiro, I think, and Abby. So at least 3 people. If I miss anybody else, feel free to chime in. Came from your Discord, Kevin. So
nice.
Glad that you shared. Glad that you got some people here, and then people that came from my audience. I think were already commenting, like super excited to see and hear from Kevin. And I'm excited. We haven't like actually talked to each other, I think, in a while. We've been in some like of our master or secret YouTuber mastermind sessions. But I don't know if I haven't been in many over the last few months as I've had other things going on. So anyway, I'm super excited to talk to you. Everybody, if you don't know for some reason, CSS is going to be like the general topic here. And I'm excited to see where you go with the over engineering idea. And so in a second, I'll kick it off. As always, people, if you're watching, if you have questions, if you want to ask Kevin questions, as long as we can fit it into the flow, we'll just throw those in and answer those and have that be a big part of the conversation that we have. And any clarifications or additional things, just let us know. And we'll dive in a second. Melissa asked if I'm still using Arc. I don't want to open up this conversation because we could start, but I'm still using Arc. And I just saw this thing called, hold on, I do want to start this conversation at least for a second. They have, what is this called? There's this new thing called Boosts. And it's like plugins in Arc that you can apply to a given page. They even have a plugin where you can write custom CSS. So Amy and I have had this issue in Podia before where some of their like the toolbar thing is not sticky. So if you scroll all the way down, it like disappears, which is super dumb. And they should have fixed it, to be honest.
I even sent them the code.
No,
I
know.
submitted
It's
a
like,
help ticket and was like, just add this for me, please.
Yes, there's no excuse. But I'm assuming like with this boost thing, you could apply that long term because that's the thing that I struggle with. Is like I could add the line of CSS, but then it goes away when I refresh. So I'm wondering if it'll do it long term. Anyway, it looks super, super interesting and has a lot of potential. So
I have a Chrome extension that's like Tamper Monkey that does that too. So like when you hit refresh, it saves.
It stays.
Also, ConvertKit, if you have tags that are very long, they always wrap. And so I've modified that, made the text a little bit smaller, made the sidebar a little bit wider.
That'd make a great like top 5 websites I've customized or like something like that would be a great video.
Yep.
Anyway.
When we hit 5,
yeah,
I do want to go back to the conversation we started like before we even started the live stream about Figma.
Oh, okay. We're gonna throw that. You want to throw that in?
No, we'll make it part of the podcast.
Okay,
part of the
episode.
Cool.
the secret here, or the suspense. We're trying to build up the like.
So many announcements.
I know, so many announcements. Amy has one
around for 5 minutes
that she will have. That is pretty exciting. All right, ready? Cool. Welcome everyone to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web development and design. And today we have the CSS wizard, is probably what I'm just going to refer to you as our guest, and Kevin Powell to talk about over engineering your CSS.
Yeah.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compressed.
What's up, everyone? My name is James Quick, and I am a full-time technical content creator.
Hello. Hello, my name is Amy Dutton, and I am a lead maintainer on the Redwood core team.
What was that?
New job title.
A little subtle announcement.
Yep.
Do you want to add like a sentence or two about that, just for clarification for people?
Yeah, so June 1st, I started full-time on Redwood and helping them out with marketing, working on open source stuff, contributing to code. So it's been fun to do something different. I've been with Zeal overall for 7 years, and so it's been fun to have a little bit change of pace and really enjoying the new job.
I'm super excited for you. And your former teammate is watching live and was like, I wonder what the announcement is, which he obviously knew, and I'm sure was super sad about. But Amy, congratulations to you. I'm super excited for you. And now we can welcome on Kevin. So Kevin and I have been like content creator friends, I guess, for several years. Early on, I had to ask for a one-on-one, I think, with you to talk about like your recording setup and use of Podia for courses and that sort of stuff. And we do programming YouTubers Discord and have some sessions in there and that kind of stuff together. But it's been a while, so super excited to have you on. Kevin, do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about your background?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for having me. Really excited to be on, so thank you very much. For those who, my name's Kevin, and yeah, primarily content creator over on YouTube, and my main motto is that I'm doing my best to help people fall in love with CSS, and if I can't get them to fall in love with it, at least help them be a little bit less frustrated by it. Yeah, that's basically what I'm up to these days.
Love it.
You were very kind in that. I thought you were going to say, if you don't fall in love with it, go away.
I'm listening.
Get lost.
And
we're not friends. Wasn't meant to be.
I was just thinking, Amy, there's one of my most popular TikToks was a series of interviews that I did at that conference. Amy actually has the hoodie on. Quick shout out to that conference, one of my favorite conference series. We were in Austin together. They're coming up in July with their conference in Wisconsin, which is super exciting. But I did a series of interviews with people, and one of the questions that I did was, what is your favorite programming language? And Amy, like as confident as she could, said CSS. And this video, I swear, got popular because people love to comment and shit talk, honestly, when people say things like that. And Amy, I think, knew that beforehand.
You're
so
welcome.
thank you, Amy, for driving visibility to my content. And I'm sure Kevin would back you up there.
So good.
Kevin, do you have like, you want to give like background and perspective on like why CSS? Like this is pretty specifically your thing. I know you have other skills, but like you've made a significant name and brand for yourself in the CSS space. Where did that love of CSS come from?
I mean, starting the channel and everything else was basically a big happy accident. So it wasn't, I never went out with like this like plan of being known as the CSS guy or anything like that. I've been playing with making websites since I was in like the end of high school in the late 90s. And it was back then, obviously it was very, very different, but, that sort of, you know, I would just make a Photoshop design, slice it up, and like that sort of got my interest going in it, but it was never anything I took seriously. Just sort of some random hobby for whatever I was interested in at the time. And then I ended up not really doing anything for a while, but eventually after several sort of changes in direction, I ended up working in print design, and I wasn't making enough money. So I was doing freelancing on the side, and most of the freelance work I was doing was UI design, just because that was easier to find for me anyway. And I'd always like on and off had been making websites for fun, so I said, well, if people are paying me to make the design, I might as well try and code it up as well. And that led me mostly to working with WordPress. And after making my own custom theme once or twice, I realized how hard it was and what a waste of time it was. So I started doing child themes. Where basically, for those who don't know, if you have a WordPress theme, you can make a child theme, so it keeps, like if you change the CSS of a WordPress theme and then it updates, you lose your update. If you're doing it in like the core files, there's the other ways that you can do it. But if you do a child theme, you can add functionality, and it's sort of a layer on top. So if there's an update to the theme, you can do that without wrecking all the work that you've done. So basically all I would do is delete the CSS file and make a new, start from scratch based on the structure and everything that was there, and add a little bit of functionality as I needed to. And I think that's really where it was sort of like a CSS Zen garden every time I'd start a new project, right? You're just starting with a blank file and building it up. and I really enjoyed that side of things. And I like, coming from a design background, CSS spoke to me a lot more than the other everything else involved in it, the other parts of it. So yeah, from there I ended up getting a job as a teacher, and when they found out I had web experience, because it was at my old school, I ended up getting a lot of the introduction to web classes, and then actually figured out how everything worked, because I realized I had no idea what I was actually doing when you try and teach something. And it sort of went from there. Yeah.
Love it.
Did you use like Beaver Builder or Genesis or any of those
Genesis,
other?
yeah. Exactly.
Nice.
I have to give call out a comment in the chat, which I think is funny enough to bring out even for like podcast audio after the fact. I was commenting on your background, Kevin, just looking so nice, and somebody said that you wrote CSS for that, and I thought that was perfect. Maybe we could just kind of dive into, because I'm really curious where you take this, and I guess I'll kind of open up the floor. But the title that you submitted originally was "Stop Over Engineering Your CSS," and a couple of interesting points for me. There's just this morning in our wins of the week session in our Discord, where we have people just share some win for themselves, so they can kind of get in the habit of celebrating themselves. There were 3 or 4 different CSS. I don't even know if they were frameworks. I don't know if they're considered tools. I don't know exactly how you call them, but there were 3 or 4 that I'd never even heard of. So that's I can kind of see maybe that's part of it, where we've got so many things, and maybe we just should do better about learning raw CSS. But then I'll put out the controversial thing is I use Tailwind on everything that I do. Not that I'm fighting anyone for whatever works for them, but that's what I do the majority of my time. So just to put out the slightest bit of controversy there. But where does the over engineering perspective on CSS come from?
Yeah, I think so I mean, I do a lot of work with beginners, or see a lot of people that are early on in their journey, and as well as people that are sort of coming from computer science backgrounds, or they have, they focused on something else and now they're sort of having to do some CSS, and getting a bit frustrated with it. And I find from both camps, the main frustration, I mean, part of it just comes from not knowing all the tools that are available. So you start, throwing together solutions, just layering stuff on top of stuff on top of stuff, hoping something's eventually going to stick. And I think we've all been there.
Familiar.
Yeah. But it also comes with CSS is so different of a language compared to anything else, just because you're not really, there's no absolutes of CSS. You're sort of giving the browser hints at what a best case scenario would be, more than you're saying this is what should be on the page, or this is how the page should look. Because you don't know the viewport size, you don't know the resolution, you don't know the user settings on their computer, you don't even know if they can see it. They might be using a screen reader and they don't even see your CSS. So the user can interact with the web page in 1,000 different ways that you'd never expect. And they might have so many different things going on. Their zoom level, who knows? So you're sort of saying here's some hints at how I'd like it to look. Some of the, setting a background color is probably something that's going to work, even though there's ways that users can override that. But, you're sort of more providing hints than saying this is exactly how this should work. And so the first thing I feel that happens is you're trying to tell people exactly what should happen, or you're telling the browser exactly what should happen. And then you get frustrated when that doesn't happen. Right. And I mean, I did this when I first started, position absolute, because I can put something exactly where I want it to be. And then I think everybody goes through that phase at one point or another, and then quickly realizes, especially with trying to make websites responsive, that doesn't work.
And really quickly, I was going to practice my parenting skills by making a dad joke, because you said in CSS there's no absolutes, and I wanted to just interject right there and be well, actually, there is. Not that it's the best thing to use all the time, but it exists.
Yeah. So my idea of not over engineering CSS basically starts with trying to lean more into letting the browser do its thing, as much as you can. And my first example for that, whenever I'm talking about it, is we have a responsive website if you don't write any CSS. So whenever you run into problems, it's because you did something. It sucks to say that or to think about it that way, because it's really easy to blame the language or blame the browser or whatever it is, but you did something along the way that's preventing it from working properly. So for me, the way to stop over engineering, or the base idea there anyway, is just lean into letting the browser figure things out as much as possible. Lean into just like, let's hint it, let's give it like the right instructions. And like I put out a video maybe, I don't know if it was a month or 2 months ago, where basically I looked at like how you could write, I think it's like 20 lines of CSS and have a perfectly fine looking website. Right? Like I didn't get into like putting in columns and doing other stuff, but like if you in an article page, like you don't need very much. But it just becomes this thing where people are like being more and more specific, and it sort of gets in the way of things. And then you could also look at it, like, you mentioned before that there's all these CSS frameworks and other things that are sort of trying to come up with solutions to CSS, to things that I would argue aren't broken in the first place. But that's maybe a bit of a different story. I don't know.
I feel like that would be a great story, though. And the idea of layering things on, and someone kind of commented this on the chat, like CSS devs blaming CSS, also them like just adding things in, trying to make it work, and then confused as to why it doesn't work. And that was definitely me. Like early on, I started web development in 2016, I think. Like I'd never done basically anything web before that, and I would do CSS, and I just immediately jumped to Bootstrap. I mean, that was the thing that was most popular at the time, and the problem was you'd quickly hit those limitations of like Bootstrap didn't do exactly what I wanted, and then I would try to customize it, and I didn't have the strong enough fundamentals. I've got fundamentals, but I don't do anywhere near what you and Amy do. But because I didn't have that, I couldn't debug what was going on, and I couldn't then fix. So I was just stuck with this, like spending way too much time trying to quote unquote fix Bootstrap instead of just learning the stuff behind the scenes first and foremost.
Yeah, I think most people probably our age went through that using Bootstrap for a lot of stuff. I know for myself, like I learned a ton by using it. And I think no matter what, like there's all these different solutions out there. It used to be Bootstrap, now there's Tailwind, then there's a million other things you can go with. Yep. I think like for me, Bootstrap is a big part of my learning, but I actually tried to figure out how they were doing stuff at one point because of what you just said, where I'd be hitting like, why isn't this working, and how can I customize that? And then like you start seeing how they did it, and that you start realizing why they made certain decisions. Some of them you might disagree with, but at least you sort of can find the logic behind it. And like I haven't touched Bootstrap in a few years now, but there's still a lot of stuff that I had do that is reminiscent to it, just because I learned a lot in it. There's really smart people who put it together that had some good ideas, that obviously it has its limitations too, but I think no matter what tool you're using, if you figure out not only how to use it at a base level, but actually learn how it works, you can learn a lot on your own as well. Yeah.
We have a lot more tools though than we did when we were using Bootstrap, because when Bootstrap first came out, everything was still floats. We didn't have a solid grid system. It's just painful.
Yeah, I think that's why Bootstrap took off, right? Just because make a column system that was just like everyone just went, oh, I can't do this on my own, and then it works here. And there's Bootstrap Foundation and a few others that sort of gave us the tools we needed to be able to do it. And then now that we have floats and grids, it makes
we're in a whole new world.
Yeah, you don't need these tools to make a nice layout anymore.
So I know the title is "Don't Over-Engineer Your CSS."
But what if we want to under-engineer? I don't know where you're going. Sorry.
What are some of the new things with CSS that you're excited about or exploring?
Yeah, there's I don't know if I can remember them all. There's so much coming out right now.
I know.
Yeah, I was actually, just a small tangent, I just tweeted the other day, I just realized I'm coming up on 650 videos, and my current topic list of videos that I want to make, like I can't even keep up with it because there's so much going on. So I'm just like, it's a good time to be in this niche. I timed it well on that front.
Yeah.
But I mean, even on that, I think there's a lot of the modern CSS stuff actually is going to help us stop over engineering certain things too, where there's new stuff becoming possible that just makes life so much easier compared to what it used to be. I do think at the same time, it does also risk the opposite, where you can eat, like I did a video looking at some, I don't know if I specifically wanted to use has in it, but I was using the has selector, And I thought I was so like smart with what I did. And then there was a comment in the video being like, couldn't you have just done this instead? And I'm like, yeah, yeah.
But then you have to play it off and you're like, yeah, you could do that, but I was trying to teach a core concept that you need to understand.
Yeah. And that's just, you know, my enthusiasm for trying out the new bells and whistles sometimes, you know, getting the better of me there. But it's I think, like, I mean, one of the small things that's a little, I think it's only in Safari right now, but it's margin trim, where basically you can, if you have an element, you can say to like chop the margin off the top and bottom of the descendants. So no one used to have like collapsing margins, and then it would cause this weird like spacing on the top and the bottom. So then you're actually putting margin 0 on everything, and then you're adding the margins back, but not on the last child, so you don't get that extra space. Anyway, now you can just be like margin trim block, I think, and then it just takes off the margin for the first child on the top and the margin on the last child on the bottom, and they're just gone. And I'm like, that's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to that actually gaining support, because it's been a while that I've been hearing about it, so it's nice to see that coming. I mean, the most
many things where I feel like I have been doing this for so long that I'm like just stuck in those ways that it's like, oh wow, you have a single property that will do that for you, and trying to stay up to date and like learn those things when you're so used to doing it the other way.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I struggle right now.
Yeah, definitely. People ask me a lot how I keep up with things, and I'm like, well, I'm kind of lucky in that it's basically my full-time job to do that now. So it's definitely an unfair advantage over like a regular person who's working at a job and having to like actually, you know, just make things work instead of nerding out on CSS all day long. But I think, you know, I just follow people on Twitter that work at the browser teams basically, and they like letting people know when new stuff is coming. But, you know, circling back to things I'm excited about, I think the biggest one is container queries. And that has selectors pretty huge as well. You know, everything is so much a component now that being able to use container queries, and with container queries, they're getting a lot of love, as they should right now, but we're going to get style queries as well. So you could be like, so it's,
that was really where I was going to.
Amy's secretly navigating the conversation. So two things. I know what container queries are, but can you define that for people that maybe don't? And then I don't know what style queries. Okay. Can you also explain that one? Because that one I don't know.
Yeah. So a container query is a lot like a media query, but instead of looking at the viewport size, it's looking at, I'm going to say the size of its parent. It's the size of its nearest defined container. So you do have to define what the container is going to be. So you could say like your main, you could declare your main as a container, and then the elements inside of it would be looking at that. So then like a media query where you could change your layout based on, you know, the size of the viewport, which was kind of annoying because maybe you have cards that are in an aside, and then the aside would jump down to the bottom in a smaller layout, but it has more room. Well, now those could actually change their layout, right? Yeah. So it was really annoying. Now you could be like, well, if it's in a place that has lots of room, then it does this. If it's in a place that has less room, it does that. And it doesn't matter what the viewport size is. And that makes a lot more sense in how to approach design. So that's really cool. And then
people, really quickly, like I think people thought of that initially. Like if you were learning CSS and you learned container, or if you learned media queries, I could see a lot of people assuming that's how media queries worked. And so for that to be like so intuitive for a lot of people, but not how it worked, backfilling that functionality in CSS now makes so much sense.
Yeah. It's definitely, go.
Sorry, I was going to say, when we first started though writing CSS, you just had like a single browser size, like everything was fixed. Yeah. So, you know, even though it makes sense maybe from a logical standpoint, when you think about the entire history of the web, it kind of makes sense too how it evolved the way it did.
Yes, definitely. And I know container queries were long thought to be impossible, just because the potential for circular logic in, you know, because the parents, a lot of the parent is being controlled by the children inside of it, you know, especially the height. So then if, you know, you put a query in that's looking at that then makes the children change. So it just creates a circular logic. So that's why there are limitations on what you can, you know, when you use a container query, you're containing the styles. So the parent's layout, like you're sort of, I'm not vocalizing this well, but the parent styles, the elements outside of the parent aren't really looking at that anymore. Like the parent, you have to have like either a set width or a set height on the parent for it to work. So if you don't have a set height or like something that's defining the height in a specific way, you can't do it, because they put in ways to prevent the circular logic anyway. So there are some limitations on how it works, but for the most part, because generally we're worried about the width, everything just works the way you'd expect it to, and it's fine. Yeah.
I'm gonna pause really quickly and just bring validation to CSS as a very deep skill set. Like I do intermediate CSS at best, and most people like yourself that talk about CSS, I don't know what you're talking about at all. But my point, what I wanted to emphasize is how you were trying to articulate this concept in CSS and having a difficult time explaining it. That's because these problems are very difficult. Like when you go through W3 schools and you do the CSS tutorial and you think, hey, I got it, like that's nowhere near what it takes to actually use CSS from a much deeper perspective, and much less like actually design or develop the APIs and the performance and all the things that go into CSS. So just wanted to use it as an opportunity to emphasize like CSS as a much deeper skill set and background, and just a bigger thing than most people think about from going through like introductory CSS courses or something.
I think what you're trying to say, James, is that CSS is a language.
Is a language. I don't know. I did a video a while back on, is HTML a language? And I guess I could do the same thing with CSS. And the reality is, like, I don't care what you call it. That doesn't diminish what it is, right? Like, you can have your own opinion, which is fine. But, like, each one of those, and probably almost definitely CSS, I think more so, has so much more to it than you think at surface level.
Actually, I'm not going to be able to find it now, but there's, like, someone... I don't remember who it was, and I feel really bad because I read the article yesterday, but it was looking at how we can use custom properties to create, like you can check for like, it's not just like, it was like switch statements basically, but you could be checking like so many, it was a really creative way to use custom properties. And there's actually some stuff coming down the road that actually will be just baked into CSS to allow it. But right now, even there's like some logic that you can build in using custom properties. That's really, really clever. There's a lot of really smart people who do this crazy stuff. Yeah.
So Jay, formerly of Google, is one of the best I've ever seen. And he would do these interactive demos with CSS. And at one point it kind of clicked with me because it had functionality that you would think would only come from JavaScript. But at one point it clicked, and it's like, basically kind of like Boolean logic that you do with checkboxes. And so based on these styles, you could have what's it called? I used to do this, like, is it bit logic? Like I took a class on this whole thing. We had to design like a vending machine logic with just bit logic or whatever, but it's all just checkboxes, and a combination of all these boxes give you different, say it's state machine. That's what I was looking for. And based on that, displays all these different things, does all these different animations. So there's really like an amazing amount of things that you can do.
I found the article, but I don't have the other chat. I'll put it in the private chat if you guys want to share it. It's called cyclic dependency space toggles. So space toggles were something that was created like there's been a few people that have blogged about those. This is like the next level up. Anyway, and for anyone who's interested, I only went through it quickly and I can't explain it properly, so I won't try. But yeah, Roman Komarov, has another one too. He's lately been on fire with some CSS stuff on his site. Definitely worth checking out.
I love that.
You're talking about staying up to date. Adam Argyle is like mind-blowing, some of his stuff, the demos that he includes. So I included a link to his Twitter in the chat. He will also be on the Compressed podcast in about a month. So.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that fun for us to learn like who the upcoming guests are from each other? Because we just independently go out and send invites to everybody we think are cool, and then we get like pleasant surprises when we show up. We're like, oh yay!
I was glad he accepted my invite because I was on a Twitter space with him where I told him I would fight him.
Oh, okay.
Adam's awesome. You'll have a ton of fun with him.
Yeah.
You'll have a ton of fun in that fight.
Yeah.
Can I actually? So two things. So I don't think we got to the definition of style queries, and then I've got a couple questions from Scion, and then one from Melissa that I'll come back to. So if you don't mind, do the quick definition of style or styled.
Style.
style queries. Yeah.
I don't want to get it wrong because I haven't used them yet. I did a video recently looking at the state of CSS, and I was talking about a whole bunch of things that I knew but I hadn't used yet. And I'm just like, I prefaced, I'm like, if I get anything wrong, please leave a comment. So I'll do my best, but I've only read about them. Basically, it's instead of doing like, using a container query or a media query being like min width this, you could say style this. So does the parent have this custom property? Yes, then style it this way. So say you had like does it have the style I think right now they're only going to work with custom properties, and then eventually they're actually just going to work with anything. But even with a custom property, you could be like, does it have the do we have warning, like custom property warning on there? Yes, then the color of the text will be this. Does it have this one? Then the color of the text. So you're styling based on an existing style on the parent rather than looking at sizes and stuff. So it's really cool.
That makes total sense. I am behind the scenes sharing a link to the t-shirt that I'm wearing. I think
getting so many comments.
I know, yeah. So Jason Langsdorff, just for context, came up with these names. So they're how to define like the brackets and stuff, and he calls them square boys, round boys, curly boys, and pointy boys. And anyway, Brad Garapi, a good friend of ours and another host of Compressed, created a shirt out of that, which every time people see it, they're like, where'd you get that? That's super cool. So link is there. We can include a link in the show notes as well. And it was actually Cassie Evans on Jason's show. Thank you for clarifying that. I assumed it was actually Jason. That is great. Thank you. I'm going to go back, and we've had lots of comments, which is great. So I'm going to scroll for a second. But Scion asked, I can write CSS, I can put stuff on the screen, but still they don't look good. How much of CSS is the syntax and how much is design? And I'm going to combine that with this question of, can you be good at CSS without being good in design? And although those things like seem like they're one and the same, I think those are like two different skill sets from my perspective that you can be good and get better at both independently and get better at them together. But Kevin, do you want to give your take on like design, being good at design versus or being good at CSS specifically?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. They're two independent skills. One thing I also, going back to the beginning when I mentioned that I was doing print design and then some freelance design stuff, the other thing I realized along the way there was I was a lot better at making the design happen than creating a design. Mm-hmm. As a mediocre designer that got a lot better at making designs actually come to life. So yeah, I think it's, I think that's one thing that beginners will do is they're like, I'm going to try and make my page now, and they get really frustrated because it looks bad. And so they feel like they're not, but like that's that design is a completely separate skill set. So you're best off just focus on one or the other. You can do both, but it's really hard to, I think, learn both at the same time. And it's also, if you don't, like I've seen some really good designers, they can just design in the browser, like they're designing through code. But unless you're really good at both, I think that's really hard to do. Yep. So like either make your design in Figma or whatever, and then try and code it, or just find designs that you can try and code up. I think is, and focus on what you want to be good at out of the two. And if it's both, then you have two different things you got to learn.
Yep.
I can do both, but I find it very hard to design in the browser just because it's using a different side of my brain. And so I feel like I almost have to flip a switch to say, okay, I'm designing now. Okay, flip a switch. Now I'm thinking in code. Yep. So it's like what you're describing. The other thing I think, if you are a designer that is coding, the biggest advantage to that is you learn to look for certain things in terms of the details. That doesn't mean you have to be a designer in order to see that. It is also part of that learned skill set, because as a designer, you're thinking through, what do my rounded corners look like? Is there consistency there with alignment? What am I looking for with the grid? All these things that a lot of people will sometimes overlook. So one of my first jobs, even though I was a designer, I was doing pure front end work, and the designers always loved working with me because I could bring their design to life a little bit more than some of the other developers, because I knew to look for those things. Mm-hmm.
So good. And I want to use this as an opportunity to get on my soapbox about skill sets and how we perceive them. And this is targeted at myself as well. Like I, for years, have had this perspective of like, I'm not an artistic creative, designy person. I don't see X, Y, and Z in design. Other people know so much more than me, and I just assume someone like Amy, I would have assumed Amy's just naturally really good at design, and maybe she is, maybe she's not. But the reality is, I've never been quote unquote good at it because I've never spent any time trying to be better at it, right? Like these are still, although some design is maybe a little more subjective, or like what is good design is maybe more subjective than something like math at times, there's still the ability to work on it and get better at it and practice it just like any other science or just like any other skill set. So it's easy for me to refer to myself as, you know, someone that isn't capable of doing X, Y, and Z, but I try to tweak that and kind of reframe it now, especially for people that are like trying to encourage people at different points in their career as they maybe talk themselves out of something, to say like, hey, you may not have done that thing yet. That doesn't mean you can't, and it doesn't mean you can't be good at it or won't have that as part of the thing that you do in your career at some point. But it does mean that you have to put in effort to get there, just like everyone else did.
Yeah, it's all a muscle. Just like coding's a muscle. If you don't do, say, JavaScript for a while and you come back to it, you feel that muscle struggling because you haven't used it. Design's the exact same way. Absolutely. And there's multiple disciplines even within design. Like I haven't done illustration in a long time, so anytime I'm drawing now, that feels hard versus just building a website, or talking about marketing design versus product design or interior design. Those are all different muscles that you exercise, and it's just a matter of putting in that time. What Malcolm Gladwell talks about, your 10,000 hours.
But yeah.
Here. I was going to give them 10,000.
However many hours.
50,000 hours is going to make you an expert.
1,000,000 hours. Yeah, I like to make sure that we kind of reinforce that, I think, for people that, again, like myself, kind of talk them out of an experience or potential for themselves. This is a great question from Melissa. This is who I kind of referred to earlier, has a art. I don't know if that includes design or if those are separate for her, but at least has an art background and does these like animated, hand-drawn kind of recap things for talks and things that she's seen. Anyway, she asked, should I still learn Tailwind or double down on vanilla CSS? And a little bit of context for her. She has gone through a boot camp, graduated, I think looking for her first developer job. So still very early on in the learning process. And I think really early on in the, how do I prioritize my time in terms of what's going to give me the most ROI for the time that I invest in the different skill sets leading to my next role. So anyway, any thoughts on like positive, negative of learning Tailwind versus potentially investing like more direct time into quote unquote vanilla CSS?
I do know, I mean, obviously I like vanilla CSS. It's what I do all day long. I really enjoy it. I do think that, I mean, with anything, like, you know, like we were talking about with Bootstrap before, like if you're limited in what you can do there, that like it's, if your understanding of the core language was limited, then it limits what you can do with it. I think that's even more so with Tailwind, because Tailwind's sort of just a different way to author CSS. And there's obviously a few, you know, some of the things are a little bit different. The syntax for certain things might not be a one-for-one, but for the most part it is. So the better your understanding of actual CSS, the better you'll be able to use Tailwind. Obviously these days Tailwind is probably something that can help with employment, so you might want to balance things out on that front. But I do know, like, I have my own Discord channel that has a lot of beginners in it, and a lot of people obviously using Tailwind, and you can really tell when someone doesn't have just a strong understanding of CSS, just because you're looking at it going, like, it's the same type of mistakes that someone might be making, whether, you know, however they're authoring it. But, you know, I think the problem with Tailwind is often it's just like, oh, we're going to use that. Because if you're doing a course or you're doing something else where like, we'll do that. And not so much in more advanced courses, but like in a beginner course, they were like, oh, we're going to focus on this. So we're just going to use Tailwind for like covering this material. It's sort of like, well, you could just include the style sheet almost at that point. Cause like, I feel like it gives the impression that, well, I can just use Tailwind and I don't have to worry about CSS. But I think having the good understanding of it's just as important.
The best thing that Tailwind's given me is that it has these sizes that are built into the framework. And so if you do a lot of work with design, you'll learn about like rhythm. So you're talking about vertical rhythm and horizontal rhythm. And so when you have those sizes built in, it almost has that built into your code,
Yep.
which is helpful instead of trying to think through it. So like instead of using magic numbers where I'm going to say 33 pixels, I'm going to use Tailwind's 32 pixels where everything's within generally 4 pixel increments or working with rims. And so my designs and the code feel a lot tighter because I'm working within their measurement system.
Yeah, and someone brought this up in the chat. This is from Adam in the chat about the comparison to JavaScript before learning frameworks, and that's exactly the point that I was going to make. I'm a big believer in understanding good fundamentals of JavaScript. Then makes it easier for you to learn a framework for all the same reasons that we just said with CSS, Bootstrap, or Tailwind, or whatever. And then also, your skill sets are more transferable across framework or methodology or whatever because you understand the core of how it works. And so maybe an easy or a specific way to kind of gauge, are you ready to move into something like Tailwind, is look at an example of a site that's built with Tailwind. Try to build that with vanilla CSS, see how that goes. And if you really struggle with it, maybe that's an opportunity or a call out to go, okay, there's some things in vanilla CSS that I should go back and review and kind of build up these fundamentals. At this point in my career, I'm not a CSS expert, and I'm not trying to be, but I know anything that I can do in Tailwind, I could do in vanilla CSS. So I'm not necessarily sacrificing my learning, although writing vanilla CSS now is more tricky just naming convention wise because I'm used to Tailwind. But I definitely think like having those core fundamentals before going on to a framework is always my suggested route to go for multiple different reasons and across like JavaScript, CSS. I don't know. Do we have like frameworks for HTML that abstract HTML? I mean, I guess JSS.
YAML.
Yeah, like templating languages. Yeah, fair enough.
The one thing, if you're trying to decide, do I do vanilla or do I do Tailwind, comes down to developer experience. Where do you want to be looking at your styles? Do you want to have to pull up a separate file? Or if you're, say, working with Svelte, do I want to be jumping back and forth between 2 different locations in my file? Or do I just want to see the HTML and see all of the classes that are applied to it? So some of it just depends on what your personal preference is.
There's I'm curious about this, Kevin, from your perspective. A question from Melissa about the feasibility or the marketability of CSS as a specialty. I have no context for this, to be quite honest. I would guess that there's like only so many positions that are like super CSS specific. I don't know that. Do you have any like insights into CSS specifically as a skill set in the industry?
So I think it exists, but it's mostly at senior levels. There's not like this whole thing of like, getting a team of people to come in and write this, for like simple stuff. It tends to be more if you're getting into like the world of design systems, the person who's in charge of the design system and maintaining that. Yep. There's definitely roles for that, but that becomes one person within the team that's sort of in charge of that. So as you said, it does limit the roles in that level, and it's mostly at larger companies that have realized the importance of that side of things and maintaining that properly. So there are people who do that, but I also do think that CSS was underappreciated for a long time as a skill set, and I think it's starting to change. It definitely hasn't completely, but especially with CSS sort of going through all these new changes that we're talking about, and it, talking about don't over-engineer your CSS as CSS becomes more and more complex. And I mean, it's a double-edged sword in the sense that we went from this really simple language that was pretty straightforward, that had its quirks, to now we're opening up all these new doors and making all these new things possible. But it obviously raises the complexity of the language itself. But hopefully, or at least my hope is that because of that, it also helps sort of raise the, make it more into its own niche and something that there might be more roles sort of suited toward that. But I have a buddy of mine, Mike Aparicio, who does design system work. His whole thing is like the less people writing CSS, the better in general, which is why having one person or a very small team that's in charge of the design system is usually a good thing. And then you get the people who want to be writing JavaScript all day long can just focus on that and use the existing system that's in place. So I do think that's sort of the structure that you'd get at most places if there is a focus and actually a role on CSS. But if you're, coming in as a junior, you're probably not going to land into a role where you're just writing HTML and CSS all day. Unless you get into stuff like WordPress and other stuff like that, those are huge. Then you probably have to get into some PHP and maybe a little bit of React now. But you know, there's so many different avenues and different streams to go into.
Some of it depends on the size of the company too.
Yeah,
so if you're
100%.
going to Google, they have like an interaction designer, a visual designer, a UX designer. They have all these things broken out. Whereas if you're at a smaller company, you're expected to do all of those things together. So if you want to specialize in CSS, I'd encourage you to look at a larger company where you have the ability to specialize like that.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. We've got several questions to come through. Maybe we can try to do these like a minute at a time
fantastic.
to try. Yeah, this is great.
Rapid fire.
Yeah, so we can throw some of these maybe quickly at you, Kevin, if you're up for it.
Yep.
I kind of mentioned the idea of like go and practice building sites with CSS before getting into Tailwind. And Sion asked, what's a good place to kind of practice that? Like maybe get some designs for inspiration to try, and or something that comes to mind is I think you and Kyle from Web Dev Simplified did like a live CSS coding challenge. I can't remember what that site is. So if you have that resource off the top of your head, that would be great.
So that one's called cssbattles.dev, I think. Anyway, if you look up CSS battles, you'll find it. The one caveat I'll give with that is it's basically like you're recreating SVGs. So it's a lot of fun, but like it's not a great skill for like actually working. Like this is a project I would build in the real life, but you learn a lot about CSS by trying to make them. So definitely a lot of fun. Another one I'd give a shout out to is Front End Mentor, because there you're getting like either UI elements or sometimes full pages. There's free plan and a paid plan, but there's lots of free content that you can get. And there's a new one by Florin Pop, who you know, James, called I Code This, which is daily little UI challenges. And they have like the built-in editor and sort of encourage a little bit of freedom based on the design that they do provide. And there's others as well, but those are the three that come to mind.
I'll give a shout out. So you can also go to dribble.com, which is generally thought of as a design tool, but just pick something that you like and say, I'm going to code this out. CodePen also has monthly challenges that you can participate in.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then I'm going to give a shameless plug for a project that James and I worked on, that you can go to Advent of CSS. It is Christmas themed, but it's still available. You can get all of that content and you can get all of the designs for free. You want a tutorial on how to code it, you can pay for that. But you can also take this and do, I know this is a CSS conversation, but if you want to add the JavaScript piece of it, you can also go to Advent of JS. So like day one, styling lines up with day one, JavaScript. So
cool. Another question is, what are some common CSS performance optimization techniques you would recommend? That's a really interesting one.
So I'll start with not worrying about selector performance, just because I did a video where I was looking at attribute selectors and I had like a surprising amount of comments being like, can't use attribute selectors, they're slow. Like I was just like, what's going on here? And then so, like the only article, the only articles I could find on it were like 15 years old. And I'm just like, is this just holdover from that? So I actually did like a ton of research, and basically there's actually Edge is the only browser right now that has it within the dev tools, but you can actually measure your selector performance. So it could potentially find a problem for you, but basically never worry about selector performance, please. Most people I think don't, and I was just like, I'm surprised so many people are worried about this. But if ever you have worried about it, don't worry about the performance of your selectors, unless you hit some weird edge cases, which are always possible. The main things you usually see with performance issues are animating things that you shouldn't animate. So box shadow animations can be terrible. They give you really clunky I'm on a pretty good computer, and I did one the other day just to experiment to make a tutorial on how to actually do it better. And it's jittery. Like the whole thing is just completely janky. Things with what was the glass morphism, where you get like the blurry background behind something. If you're animating stuff behind that, the browser can have a really hard time with that. Anything like, it's usually transforms and animations. Like the golden rule of thumb is limit your animations or transitions to rotate, scale, or
I think they throw in opacity.
Opacity and transforms or translates, scale, opacity. Like those are all like on the GPU, so they go much better and smoother. Obviously, there's times where you can't do that, or you're doing a background color or whatever, you probably won't run into an issue. And there are actually dev tools that can help you like analyze performance during all of these things. But just I guess the main thing is like sometimes you do something that looks really good on your computer, but then be careful because not everyone's on your device. And like, you get on an old phone or something and it just grinds to a halt.
Yep. Awesome. Yeah, that's perfect.
It's also helpful if you're going to do transition to actually list out what properties you are transitioning instead of just saying all.
Yes.
Because then it like watches everything and you know exactly which properties you're trying to handle.
And actually there is also, if you run into performance issues with animations or transitions, there is the will change property, so you can say ahead of time what's going to be changed. So the browser can actually like preload it almost. The only thing is some people will then be like, I'm just going to use this everywhere because it helps with performance, and then it does the opposite because then the browser is like, I have to preload all of this stuff. So it's one of those things that only do it if there's already a performance issue. If there's nothing wrong, don't use it because then it has an inverse effect.
I would probably, if I were to sum this up, like there's some specific things, but also like until it's an issue, don't make it an issue. Like we all want to over optimize or over engineer everything, I think, at every turn. And that's why kind of the data structures and algorithms like whiteboarding interviews and JavaScript, like I think it's useful stuff to have, but it's also like it's just not an issue when you're doing your first React app, right? Like these are real problems for Google because they have massive everything. Like it's really important for them, but none of that stuff is really that important until it proves itself that it is by being not performant. I usually tell people if they're worried about performance in CSS, it's like, have you looked at everything else first? Because like start with your images, then there's probably some other stuff in JavaScript. There's probably CSS should probably be the lowest thing because everything else is going to be probably a lot easier to actually optimize. Another question, and I feel like this is like we've had an episode dedicated to this. We've talked about this in different contexts, but question is around AI and like how does that affect CSS and web developer jobs in the long run? I don't know how you can respond to this. Like I find it really hard to believe that AI is going to be able to replace what Kevin can do right now, or for a long time. You know what I mean? So I don't know what your perspective is on AI generated code for HTML, CSS, etc.
I think in general, I think we went through like that first wave of everybody panicking when first ChatGPT came out and then GPT-4, and then realized it's not very good. I think it can be good for learning. It can be good for getting help. It can be good for coding faster. I don't think it's good at writing code. I think with CSS specifically, because it's not context aware, which that's all CSS is basically, is being aware of what's going on. Like you can't write CSS in isolation. Like you have the whole page to worry about. So a lot of the stuff I've seen from it ranges from like not great to flat out wrong. GPT-4 is better, obviously. I've had ChatGPT just give me wrong and like things that are completely wrong, which I think everybody's run into. We are saying long run. I think it's going to be a tool. I don't think, I think it's going to be a tool that helps with probably, we can do more stuff faster. I don't think it's going to replace anything anytime soon.
100%. I'm right there.
As a brief sidebar, one of my favorite responses that I've gotten from ChatGPT is it gave me something and I said, will you please provide sources? And it said, well, this is hypothetical. I just made it up. There are no sources.
Okay. Oh, if that doesn't make you feel better. Well, I think, and Scott Talinsky posted a tweet the other day of saying, I just wish ChatGPT would tell me I don't know instead of making stuff up. And I was like, well, that would kill the hype with AI if it just admitted.
There was a lawsuit because some guy as a public figure in like Australia, it made stuff up about him and he was trying to sue it for defamation.
Yeah.
Like, who do you sue?
The policies around that is going to be really interesting to follow over the next, many years probably. I'm going to find this. There was an article I read. I skimmed through it this week that was talking about like problems with AI, and a huge part of it was like the trash that it creates that we're now going to have to sift through.
Yeah. There was something I was I didn't go into it deep, but the problem now that there's so much AI generated content is that the AI is learning from the AI generated content, and it's actually getting worse because so it's hit like, so
It's
now
like
they're
the blind
gonna
leading the blind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh man. I want to give Kevin you an opportunity, and specifically like for my awareness, and I think everybody else, what's on your radar content wise? Courses, bigger things, cheat sheet, like what's on your top of mind for content around CSS?
Yeah, I mean, most of everything I do is on my YouTube channel, where I'm just trying to keep up with everything that's going on and do good stuff there. I do have a couple of courses, and I'm hoping, let's say by the end of next month, I should have a new course coming out called Beyond CSS as well, which is a lot more of a higher level one than my other courses, which are more beginner friendly. So that one looks more at design systems and sort of working with creating sort of a system that is so you can write less CSS, a little bit like we were talking about. And a little bit, not quite for people that don't want to or don't enjoy writing Tailwind, but still don't mind some utility classes. We're looking at like generating stuff for spacing, for sizing, for your font sizes, for your colors, but then also sort of getting into doing other stuff as well with a bit more custom CSS, getting into naming conventions, getting into, organizing your files and all of that, and building out a bit of a design system and all of that stuff. So it's called Beyond CSS, and as I said, hopefully by the end of the month, its doors are opening. But courses, I always say it's like 2 weeks away, but then that's every 2 weeks I say the same thing. So
it's so hard.
Yeah,
it's so hard. Yeah, that's going to be amazing though. So it's at beyondcss.dev is
yes,
the link
that's right.
for people that are interested. Cool. Nice.
Yeah, that's the big thing I'm working on right now.
Do we want to move into picks and plugs?
Let's do it.
Cool. So this is our last segment of the show where we do picks and plugs. We pick something that we have enjoyed, bought, used, watched, listened to, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be tech related. And then plug is anything that we want to promote as well. Either one of you want to start?
I found a great one this week. I had this idea. Well, I had an idea for an app, and I was like, I bet somebody's already built this, and they have, and it's fantastic. It's exactly what I dreamed it would be. It is called Fake Filler. Heard of this?
Nope.
So it is a Chrome extension that if you've ever had to, say, build a web form, you end up submitting it 500 times trying to test it and to see if it works. And you are just constantly filling out name, email, whatever. This extension will fill all that out for you. So it just pops a bunch of content in, you can hit submit. So it's doing some form development this week, and this made it a lot faster. So check it out, Fake Filler. And then I'm going to plug, I haven't plugged this, I don't think, my Twitter account. I've been posting a bunch of stuff on there lately, just different things that I find, stuff I'm working on, and would just love to connect with people on Twitter. So my handle is self-teach-me. I'm hanging on to Twitter. So unless somebody wants to send me a blue sky invite.
Maybe I have one. I don't know. I have an account.
Of course you do.
But I haven't done anything
Just
with
rub
it.
it in.
Yeah.
Add to the FOMO. Actually, this was really funny. Somebody tweeted this week because apparently James and I appear in their feed back to back. So they were asking if we were part of the algorithm.
The algorithm? Yeah, there you go. Look at you.
If we were part of the algorithm, and I pointed to the place in the algorithm of Twitter. This is where it would be. Here's the conditional.
Right next to if it's Elon, if it's Amy, if it's James. Yeah. Yep. Cool. Kevin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'll pick something we were talking about pre-show, which is the new Figma Dev Mode that I just started playing around with.
We forgot to talk about this during the show.
Yeah, it's sort of making Figma so much easier to use as a developer. Everything you can size in rems, which is fantastic. So you're not trying to, for everybody who's like, I don't feel like converting units, you don't have to anymore. It also changed like a whole bunch of stuff with like now there's variables and you have your styles that you can save, but there's variables that can get saved too. And it sort of tries to map them as custom properties. There's stuff that definitely needs to be worked on. They are in beta still with their launch and stuff, but the VS Code plugin is really good because you can like see what you're working on in VS Code, and if you need an asset, you download it. And I don't know how, but it knew where my images folder would be, even though I didn't have one yet, and it suggested that to save it there. And I'm just like, okay, that works for me. So that was cool. And you can link to like Asana, GitHub, Storyblock. So you can like link, like this component lives here, and if you click on the component, it opens that file in your folder. And I'm just like, nice. So
that's cool.
I will.
And you will have a video. Oh, sorry. Is that what you're going to say? You will have a video?
No, I wasn't going to say that, but I'll say that. I do have a video coming out next Tuesday. Yeah. Where I take my first dive into it and sort of explore it. But I will caveat saying they will be making it a paid product, which sucks. I don't know if it's included in, like, if you're already paying for it or not. I didn't find the pricing page was very clear on that. I'm hoping it's included. But for anybody, like, I'm just like all these students that are just learning from Figma files that then are like, I can't use this after, 6 months from now. It sort of sucks. Because it is a really cool feature, and I'm already super happy with it, and it's early days still. So yeah.
Shoot, I have the extension pulled up for VS Code, and it was released June 8th and already has 81,000 downloads. That's insane.
I'm not super surprised.
Yeah. And I guess I'll plug my newsletter, because that's the best place to keep up with everything I'm up to. So it's just, if you go to kevinpowell.co, you'll see a link for the newsletter, or kevinpowell.co/newsletter. And it's sort of a place where I share everything I've been up to, but I also like have general musings that I open up the newsletter with, where I talk about stuff that I, more in depth or more personal or whatever's on top of my mind. Some people really like it, so maybe you would too. Yeah.
I'm subscribing right now.
I'm subscribed to that one. It's one of like a handful that I get on a regular basis, so I enjoy it.
Thank you.
Melissa commented in the chat about the VS Code plugin that yesterday it had 5,000 installs, and Amy, you just said it had 80,000. So you can kind of see the like exponential growth. And one clarification for Kevin on your video: if people are listening to this in the podcast version, that video is already live. So go and check out Kevin's YouTube channel, and maybe go back a few weeks to find the video on the VS Code, well, just the dev mode.
You can include a link.
Yeah, that too. Cool. I am going to, I think I've done this before, but I feel bad because I was sent this for free, full transparency, and I was supposed to have shared more about this, and I haven't. But I do love it, and it is a genuine reaction. So I have a phone stand from Grove Made, and these are expensive, so that's another caveat. This is like $150, so it's like very expensive. It was sent to me for free. Again, all like transparency, full transparency. But it's one of the nicest looking and most like sturdy phone chargers I've ever used or seen. Like it's like almost, it's not too heavy, but it's like a brick. Like it's a heavy, solid thing, and it looks really amazing. And my phone is like super up there in a perfect position. Like I can look down, glance at it while I'm doing a stream or whatever, see everything I need to. So it's really, really nice. So this is from Grove Made. They have really like kind of high-end, high-quality products. I also have, and I may pick this later, the like monitor stand where both of my monitors sit on top of it too. So this is at grovemade.com, and you can search for the MagSafe stand for iPhone. And then I will plug my Astro course at astrocourse.dev. So Brad Garapi, we mentioned a couple of times, helped build the demo for this, and the website is live. You can sign up for the newsletter for now for announcements, and I will start recording videos in July and hopefully have those kind of published and ready to go. Similar to you, Kevin, maybe we can have an accountability text or something to push each other to finish by the end of July. But anyway, this is a course on Astro, relatively new framework, primarily built it like statically generated content, but also has server-side rendered content, API endpoints, all the things to do like fully functional, full stack applications. So astrocourse.dev. I have a supportive comment on the Grove Made that Astrid has it too, feels more premium than Apple.
I know.
Agreed.
That's huge.
More than Apple. It's hard to be more premium than Apple. Cool. Anything else we need to add in before we wrap it up?
It was a fun chat.
It was.
Yeah.
We can talk about CSS more.
I know, yeah. You can tell the episodes where Amy could do like 3 or 4 of these like back to back, just like topic wise, which I could too. This has obviously been super fun for me. And it has been cool, Amy, for you and I to be back on a podcast together for the first time in a month, maybe, because I was out several, and then we had Brad fill in for the one last week when I was here, and I did one yesterday.
About 6 weeks
by myself. Yeah, so it's good to see you and
it is
hang
good
out
to
with
see you
again. Kevin, thank you as always for coming and hanging out with us and talking about CSS. We appreciate having you on. And lastly, everybody, for listening. If you're listening to the podcast version of this, make sure to leave a rating and review to help other people find the podcast so we can continue to bring on amazing guests like Kevin. In the meantime, that's all we got.
We also have a request for curly content.
Curly content? Yeah, what was the conversation? Like, Melissa's
curly
looking
hair.
for tips on just curly hair in general?
It's a process.
Okay.
We won't bore everybody. I'll start my own podcast.
About curly? Yeah, that sounds like a huge audience.
It's a very large niche. I mean, not very. It's a very specific niche.
Yeah, that does exist.
It does. The underworld.
Fair enough. B1 Mine says he needs that for his daughter. Maybe I will need that for my daughter in probably a few years. Probably not immediately soon, but hair care bonus content. Yeah, if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get Amy's full morning routine in addition to episode announcements.
I was going to say, B1 Mind, the trick is to search for curly girl method, and that'll
Curly girl method.
unlock everything.
I need to check out the fake filler extension, by the way, because I've been in that same situation for like testing forms on a site. And I just recorded a crash course on Next.js app router, and I was trying React server actions.
Yep, that's what I was working on.
Oh, really? Did you get them to work?
Yep.
Because I was having issues with mine.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I looked at your repo very quietly.
Oh, did you really?
And I didn't see what was wrong.
Okay. I don't either.
If I saw it now, what is driving me crazy, if anybody in the chat wants to talk about, is I'm getting a jest error on any component that is using a server action, and it's saying we can't find this module, and I'm like, I'm not using this module. It has to be under the hood. I can't do anything.
Jest only runs in the browser, right? Or is that true?
It's in
Does it
VS
only
Code.
touch?
Like you don't need it to like run a successful site, but if you're writing tests for your components, which is what I'm doing, I'm running that in VS Code, I'm getting an error on everything. So
Is just not testing browser JavaScript though? Because if it's
I mean,
used
I'm not
to
getting an error
testing-
in the browser. Let me just say that I'm not getting an error in the browser or the server
But when
it's
Jest-
running. But when Jest runs, just like, I don't know what to do with this. What are you doing?
I would think it's just not.
I might just
prepared
put
to-
something
I don't
in the discussion on GitHub to see, because there's a few other places where people are having issues with other modules. So, and Cyan God, yes, I should start streaming again. That was fun. I haven't done that in a while.
I haven't done one in a while either, outside of podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's not true. I had a guest on the other day, but it wasn't like me just live coding, is what I meant.
Yeah.
I can continue to
I
add caveats.
actually, as we were talking about earlier with the new job, I will be streaming more. So
Sweet. Looking forward to it. Kevin, you're getting lots of shout outs in my Discord right now as
nice.
people are like, this stream was amazing.
are you're not like streaming in Discord live, are you?
No, just people commenting.
Okay.
Someone commented that
Oh.
Mark commented that he couldn't make it. Melissa was saying she was really looking forward to the episode after kind of learning who you are recently, I think, and then seeing the tweet about the episode. Yeah, Melissa's saying how she loves you, not to make it sound awkward or anything. Cool. I think we can probably kill the stream. I'm going to raid, if you're on Twitch, I'm going to raid you over, as I almost always do, to Clarkio. Yep.
I always
He is
forget
live.
that I have it open, and I'll come back like 2 hours later and be like, oh.
Yeah. And he's still going. I think he goes
He
for
is.
a long time.
He
yeah.
is.
All right. If you're on Twitch, I'm going to send you over now. Thank you for hanging out with us. Hope you enjoy Clarkio. And then I'll go ahead and end it for everybody else. Thanks for watching.